Today's episode of the Gurupresario Podcast is sponsored by the Law Offices of George Salinas. The Law Offices of George Salinas is an award-winning personal injury law firm based in San Antonio, Texas. George Salinas has been recognized as a Texas super lawyer, which is limited to the top 5% attorneys in the state. The firm was also recognized for a top 10 verdict in Texas and top 100 verdict in the U.S. in 2020. To learn more, give them a call at 210-225-0909 or visit them at salinastriallaw.com. Alrighty, guys. What episode is this, Oz? 25. Episode 25 of the Gurupresario Podcast. Again, I'm here with my co-host, Matthew Duke of the Duke Law Firm, and new friend, George Salinas of the Law Office of George Salinas, right?
Yeah, that's it.
George, we're happy to have you. I'm going to give you a brief moment, as I always do, to introduce yourself and your firm and kind of where your practice lies here in 2021.
Sure. Oh, thank you. We are a personal injury law firm. Been around. Actually, this is our 10th year anniversary as we speak this summer. So pretty excited about that. We're based out of San Antonio. We work all over the state of Texas, but the focus of our practice is San Antonio. We have offices in Austin. We have an office in Dallas, but San Antonio's home. And, looking to expand and grow as we move forward. But we've got about 25 folks on our team here in San Antonio, so we've grown over the years. Pretty proud of that, and done some great stuff here locally.
Good deal, man. Good deal. What type of practice do you run?
So we are 100% personal injury. I graduated from law school in 2005. Started out 1 year with a defense firm defending these types of cases, and got hired on by a firm that was on the other side of a case. So, I started doing PI plaintiff work in 2006 right away out of law school, and I've been doing that ever since. It's truly what I feel is my calling, my passion, my joy, and what drives me.
It's a little different than your firm, right, Matt?
Yeah, we just do business transactional stuff. But what kind of mix do you do as far as, personal injury? Are you auto? Are you workers' comp? Where do you guys do that mix on the personal injury side?
Sure, good question. We do, so first of all, with personal injury, we take all types of personal injury. The only two types of personal injury that, because of the laws and tort reform that's happened over the course of the last 20, 30 years in Texas, medical malpractice we don't do, and workers' comp. Okay. Workers' comp's its own animal, its own separate body of law. I could talk forever about why it's jacked up and needs to be reformed, but the bottom line is not a lot of lawyers do workers' comp anymore. There are some that do it. They do it in volume. When we do get workers' comp cases, sometimes we will, what we'll do is we'll refer them to a firm that's still doing workers' comp.
Sure.
There are times where workers' comp cases actually, there's an injury that occurs on the job. The employer has workers' comp, but a third party's involved. And so we do take those cases. As far as the mix goes, I'd say for, generally speaking, 60, 70% probably motor vehicle crashes.
Okay.
Another 20% tractor-trailer crashes. Okay. And then, the rest is a combination of work injuries and premises liability cases, and then various other mixes of personal injury. As you know, people get injured a lot of different ways.
They do.
And what we do is when they come in the door or when they call, regardless of the setting, we look at it to see if it's a viable tort case.
Okay.
But yeah, the great majority of those cases, most folks who've been injured before involving the negligence of another individual are going to be motor vehicle crashes.
Got it. Now, did you go into law school thinking this is what you wanted to do?
I went into law school knowing that I wanted to be a trial lawyer.
Okay.
And I didn't know.
Where'd you go to law school?
UT.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah, so I knew I wanted to be in the courtroom.
Yep.
I wanted to be practicing in front of a jury, judge, representing a client in the courtroom, as opposed to more of a transactional setting, right?
Sitting at a computer all day long, typing and typing and typing. Yep, that's what we do.
But hey, it's something that I'm not good at. It takes no matter what you do, it takes a special
exactly
talent. It's whatever your calling is, right? And so a lot of the folks that I know on the transactional side, they don't want to be in a courtroom, you know. And you ask us in the litigation side, we don't want to be. We're more and more these days, the nature of litigation is less and less courtroom stuff,
Right.
and more sitting behind a computer and typing and being on the phone all the time.
Right.
So, we do a lot of that too.
Well, it's funny. I've never met a litigator that wasn't intentional about being a litigator. I've met a lot of lawyers, including myself. I was an accidental lawyer, and so ended up as a transactional lawyer. But every single litigator I've ever met went to law school saying, I'm going in the courtroom. Every single one of them. So I had to ask.
Yeah, no, it's a fair question. I think my calling, so to speak, as far as wanting to be a lawyer, like when was that moment that you knew you wanted to be a lawyer and you wanted to be specifically a trial lawyer? Right. And I would say that was the OJ trial.
I was about to ask you, was it a book or was it a public event that got you into it? Okay.
It was the OJ trial. So funny story. I was, I started, I think I was in 94 that happened, because we had just moved from my hometown of Del Rio to Waco for 1 year. And I didn't know anybody. I mean, I didn't have any friends, and I had really nothing to do after school other than run home and just watch the OJ trial. So I kind of, fortuitous way that happened, and I got into it, and sooner, there was a point in time when, I started critiquing, and I started, I sounded like a crazy person probably, because I was delivering cross-examination questions, and I was like, it hooked me at that point. Wow. I got hooked, and later on, this was probably about 4 or 5 years ago, I actually got to sit down and have lunch with F. Lee Bailey, who was one of the lead attorneys on that case.
Wow.
I took him to a restaurant here in San Antonio, Mira Sol. We had a few chispas, and
Nice.
Well, I had more than a few. And I just got to talk to him for like 3 or 4 hours, and
awesome.
it was such a cool experience for me, because someone like that, was a legend, or he passed away recently. May he rest in peace. But he had some ups and downs after that trial, and but the bottom line is, like, watching him and some of the other lawyers in that case really inspired me, and I joined the debate team and started doing mock trial, and that kind of set the path forward.
Wow.
It's intense, man. There's other experiences that happened after college. Yeah, tell us about that.
Yeah, so I after when I was in college, I kind of knew that the plan was go to law school, right? And so I applied my senior year in college, and got into UT, and moved. I went to St. Mary's here locally for my undergraduate. Right. Moved to Austin, and that was a great experience. It was different for me in a lot of ways, because going to law school at UT, it was a whole different experience than I had previously. St. Mary's was a great experience. There were a lot of folks that were from San Antonio that went to St. Mary's, and so I really I felt like that really helped tie my ties to or bring my ties to this community stronger, because I eventually moved back, obviously.
Right.
Austin was different, because it was my first time really being in an environment where you had people from all across the country who've gone to school all across the country come together from all types of different backgrounds, and that was a challenging experience for me at first. It was very much a wake-up call to me, because I think that I had gotten sort of I had excelled and had done well, and I had I worked full-time since I was like 16, and so I was able to manage all of those things and do pretty well at them. And when I got into law school, the first thing they'll tell you is, well, you can't work. And I thought, well, I can work. Like, I've done it since I was 16, and working at, going to school at 8 a.m., getting out at 3:30, and then going and work at Blockbuster from 4 p.m. to midnight. And, I can do that. I'm pretty sure I can pull this law school thing off. But so I didn't get a job, because you're not allowed to. But right away, I think it was when I saw the caliber of students, right, and the difficulty and the challenge with some of what they were asking of us. It was a wake-up call. And that first semester rolled by, I was used to, I think before that, being able to sail at the top of my class pretty easily, and found myself in the middle. And that wasn't a position I was used to finding myself. And so I had to, it was a good wake-up call, though. It was a good wake-up call. But I did go, I eventually did get to work later on in law school, in the Capitol, actually. And that was a great learning experience for me.
Nice.
And people, you may not realize, I mean, UT is one of the top 10 law schools and has been for, I mean, ever. I don't think it's ever slipped out of the top 10, has it?
I don't think so. No.
Yeah, I mean, this is, it's the big time. And then law schools, I mean, there's a finite amount, although they continue to grow. You've got top tier, top 10%, top tier, and then second and third tier. I mean, and again, UT, it's the cream of the crop. So
Right.
Yeah, no, it was.
I can imagine.
Yeah, it was a good experience because I mean the professors were phenomenal. The people that I went to law school with, I think it was pretty neat to see these folks a lot of them whose parents were family to famous folks or politicians and stuff like that. Right. And so it was pretty cool from a networking standpoint. And I met some lifelong friends in law school. It was great. And I think with UT, they do a really good job of diversifying the backgrounds on so many different levels, right? So, I think, it was definitely that in St. Mary's. I mean, I can't sit here and say that, one experience I think the word is better, doesn't really apply. They were just very different experiences, and they're both of them still, very important to me. Where did you go to law school? Alabama, okay.
Yeah.
Undergrad too?
No, went to Incarnate Word.
Okay.
So we've got a little bit, parallel paths in the fact that, small community, grew up here, stayed basically at home, although I didn't live at home to do that. And then went to get an MBA at Alabama and ended up going to law school accidentally. Which was great. Top tier law school. It's in the top 20, not the top 10, but, same sort of, interesting experience for me. I did pretty easy school. I was like, all right, didn't have to work hard. Law school, very different, right? Everybody's hungry. I mean, it's all about rankings and, everybody. So, eye-opening experience.
Yeah, super competitive environment,
eye-opening.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know some law schools are more cutthroat than others. I don't think UT has a reputation for being cutthroat in the sense of they don't do the bell curve and the cutoff and all that.
Yeah, they're nice to y'all like that. No, they did that at Alabama. I mean, they literally tied you up 1 through 150, and you saw exactly what number you were.
Wow,
every single semester.
Speaking of competitive, man, there's a lot of personal injury attorneys here in town. What do you guys do to remain competitive, or I guess add value to those who hire you?
That's a great question. You're right. I mean, this is actually one of the most, believe it or not, competitive markets in the country, not Texas, country, when it comes to personal injury. I work with several different companies when it comes to my marketing. And, there was a company that I was talking to, one of the newer companies that I'm working with on the digital side. And I was talking to them about expansion in other markets, and the comment to me was, if you can carve out a space in San Antonio like you have, you can carve out a space anywhere in the country.
Oh yeah.
San Antonio is one of the most competitive markets in the state, and Texas is one of the most competitive markets in the country when it comes to personal injury. I probably don't have enough time to go into the dynamics of why that is, but the point is it's saturated. There's a lot of folks out here, so how do we diversify?
Right.
The answer to that question now is different than it was probably 10 years ago for me, because when I started my practice out, I didn't have a bankroll to rely on to start marketing my firm, and so I had to get cases any way that I could as far as referrals from other lawyers, and we still rely on that, even though we market to the general public. Attorney referrals are a huge component of our docket still. Even some of our best cases have come from that. But so when I started out, it was providing that quality to each case, to where a referring attorney knew that if they sent me a case, and they know if they send me a case, whether it's me or any of my team members, we're going to take care of that client, right? And that involves, when you're talking about personal injury cases, it doesn't involve, yes, the final result's a huge component of that. But I think so much of a personal injury case involves the experience for the client, involves the journey. And in certain parts of that journey where they feel like they're being taken care of, they feel like they're being listened to, right? And they feel like they are being explained, and that there's transparency there on the part of the law firm and the lawyer. And I think knowing that, focusing on that, and being able to do that for folks, I started getting more and more referrals, and I started getting clients who were referring cases to former clients, referring more clients to me. You fast forward 5 years later, and all of a sudden, I'm reinvesting into my business, and we're able to do that, start marketing, and it took a while. It's still a work in progress for that to expand, but we haven't lost that belief, those core values, right? Those things that make us different. And I'm not saying that there aren't other firms that believe the same thing or other lawyers that do the same thing, but we really focus on that. And I think, you can lose. I was having lunch with a business owner last week, and we were exchanging just sort of philosophies about business and things like that. And he shared with me a quote that I hadn't heard before, but I thought is true, is that when you gain breadth, you sometimes lose depth. And that's true. That's a challenge as a business. When you grow, when you expand, are you losing that depth? And so I've been obsessed with not losing our depth. And I think that so much of being able to continue that has been, and not anything to credit myself with, but the people that are on my team who we've brought in, right? And I mean, I think so much of our success, most of our success, maybe all of our success is some of what I've done, but it's people who are part of my team and what they've done, right? You're only as successful as the people on your team.
Right.
Talk a little bit more about, I mean, we are our attorney and counselors. Some people use that, right? The emotional impact of personal injury, it's a lot. I mean, I don't do it, but I've got friends that do it. I've got a just, general awareness. But I mean, you're talking to people that don't understand the court process and have had a trauma. They've had a traumatic event, right? An auto crash, they've slipped and fall, and medical bills, and their whole world is different. How have you adapted to that? I mean, because law school doesn't prepare you for law anyway. But how have you adapted on that journey to deal with people on their emotional journey? Because you're really the symbol for them of getting through that journey, right? My lawyer is going to take care of this. Oh, I have a lawyer. They're taking care of this. Talk a little bit more about the emotional part of it.
Sure. I think you're exactly right. Law school doesn't prepare you for that aspect. I mean, there's a lot law school doesn't prepare you for, from the business operations, right, to sort of, I guess what we call more of an emotional intelligence,
right?
Empathy, compassion, those sorts of things. Either you have it or you don't in some cases, right? And I'm not saying that you can't get better at it if you have it, but when I'm hiring people, that's what I'm looking for, depending on the role that I'm hiring for, is that empathy. And yeah, when folks, and it's interesting because in dealing with my field, you deal with the whole range of loss. I mean, from your standard motor vehicle crashes. Someone all of a sudden has an issue with their health, is their spine, their neck, their back, and it's always interesting when people, in talking to people and people that I've had a chance to really connect with, they always say, I never thought I would be doing something like this, right? They were always the type like I don't want to, I'm against these types of cases, but it happened to me and I realized this shouldn't have happened and how much it's affecting my life, and not just aches and pains, but what you can do in life, what you can, the activities that you can participate in, hobbies, family. I mean, it spills over into so many different things. And so I think, it's an emotional journey for people. It's an emotional journey, and it doesn't help when the system, right, the system that we have, insurance companies, they're businesses. Right. They're not set up, they're not nonprofits, right? They're not there to truly, their objective isn't, let me see how I can make this person whole. What is the least amount of money that I can pay, if anything, to get this person to sign a release and I never have to answer this again, right? And so it's set up that way. And then if when we file a lawsuit, which happens quite a bit because we don't come to terms with the insurance company, the journey through the court system, for anyone that's been through it, that it takes a long time to get to to that final place where you can get your damages heard in front of a jury, And so, I think one thing we like to do in my office to make sure that folks are obviously know what's going on, but know what to expect, right? And so we don't take a case in my office unless we're willing to take that journey from A to Z. If we can resolve it without having to file a lawsuit one day, then so be it. Great, right? But we prepare folks for the journey, and if it can be resolved earlier than if we had to file a lawsuit, then that's great. That's great for everybody.
Right.
But if it's not, then we have to be willing to take the next step. And so, it's an emotional journey. And what I was saying earlier is the full spectrum and stuff. I think what's helped me personally, right, has been having a family now, and having little kids and understanding how important my role as a father is, and being able to interact with them, on many different levels. Having them play around with them, jumping with them, doing those things, and so. I think I've had quite a few cases where we've dealt with the fatalities, unfortunately, and it just, especially when that person was a parent, oh man, that's tough.
Yeah,
it's tough. So as a father, it's just like watching, it's really difficult, and so, I think. It's hard, how do you compensate someone for not having a mother or father for the rest of their life?
Yeah.
How do you do that? And having to sit down with a family and talk about the loss, and it's an emotional process. I mean, I know you as a lawyer, you've got to be able to put emotion to the side, which is so true. But at the same time, I think you have to be able to connect with your clients at an emotional level to understand and explain ultimately to a jury, right?
Right.
Why they should do what you're asking them to do, And, before the pandemic hit, I probably had my longest jury trial, which was 3 weeks. And luckily we finished it up before the pandemic hit, because it would have not been fun to have start over in the middle of it. I think for me, just that was the first time where I really feel like I argued that case from a place where I fully understood what my client was, what he had lost.
The pain and suffering.
The pain and suffering, right? And I could be his mouthpiece, and we got a great result. And I think the jurors appreciated the level of sincerity and authenticity that I had, and I credit that to my life experiences, right? And being able to use that to help me be a better lawyer.
Right.
I think that's huge, man. I specifically, I won't go too deep into it, but I had a little cousin who died in a car accident, and I look back at kind of the trial process, because of course the verdict I don't think was delivered in their favor as much as it should have been. And I look back and I just think, and I guess I was too young to understand what these attorneys were doing for my family, but I'm like, was that the missing factor, is that they could not build empathy and they couldn't deliver the story to the jury at that moment. And then, that was ultimately maybe the failure.
Right.
But I think that's big, man. That's huge that you say that, and I think it's important, I think, for anyone looking for an attorney when it comes to something like that, a traumatic event, finding someone that they could connect with and that could deliver that empathy.
Yeah.
How do you, it's funny, Mal had a great a marketing event with people from all sorts of different industries to talk about marketing challenges, and somebody made the comment to me that as a lawyer I needed to get like a hammer or something, and I'm like, I'm not that kind of lawyer, but you are. So how do you, from a challenge of connecting with a potential client, right? You do have the knuckleheads that are, holding hammers and jumping on vehicles, acting like they're going to, it's ridiculousness. Versus what you really need, right, are these people like you that connect, that deliver not a hammer, but the story and present the case and connect and, get the right, a fair judgment for whatever it is, which is very different, right? Somebody can act like they're swinging a hammer and they're going to do nothing. In fact, they'll mess it up potentially because they don't connect. It's all about them and not about the client. How do you get through all of that kind of noise that's out there to connect with potential clients and to make sure that people understand you?
Well, I think, first, I think there's some folks out there that do marketing in ways that not my style, and I don't have actually I think it's fine for me. Like I don't have anything like Jim Adler, the hammer guy. I mean, it's funny to me, and and he's actually pretty. I've heard him speak at a podcast, and he was a really nice guy. But yeah, but the tough part about it for us of marketing like that, I don't see it as a threat to me as a business so much as we sometimes have to deal with the perceptions of jurors of who we are as lawyers, right?
Yep.
So, I think that folks, and to be fair, like, if I wasn't doing what I do, I probably would think the same thing, like, you're one of those guys, know? And I think, so that's where the challenge of marketing is, that there's different styles of marketing. And for me, because don't get me wrong, I've talked to more than one advertising agency that's like, you're wasting your money because you're not doing anything that people necessarily are going to remember.
At the time of the accident, they're going to remember the hammer, right? Exactly. The Texas hammer remembers, and that's when they make their decision point, right?
Exactly. But I was, either wise or foolish enough not to follow that advice when I got it. And I just thought, well, you know what? If I just keep investing in building my brand, as opposed to a jingle or anything like that, just
being authentic, I think, more than anything.
Yeah, for sure. And if I keep doing that, it'll eventually work out, right? And it requires a lot of patience, but it really is. It's a journey. It's the macro, not the micro, right? And so it was tough for a couple of years when I started marketing. I think I started marketing in 2017, as far as like billboards.
Okay.
Buses and things like that. Man, you're sending a lot of money out the door, and it's investing in yourself and investing in your business, in my view, was never a question, but it's in how am I going to do it, right? And so I think, though, that now we're in a place where I've been doing it long enough, and have been able to touch enough people. When I say touch, I mean, represent and interact with in the community, that when, the folks understand who we are and what we're about, right? And so, I don't know. There's, it's a conversation that I've continued to have with people, and just I enjoy the business side of it and the marketing side of it, right? But to whatever extent, I think marketing is just such a, in my opinion, multifaceted approach, right? And it's not just the billboards help, the buses help, the radio helps, but so does who you are in the community, right? And San Antonio is a big small town, right? It is. And so word gets around, and if you're not treating people right, if you're not doing good work, if you're not if you're not standing behind your name and the promises that you make, it's just a matter of time, before people find out who that is. So, and that's I don't know if that completely answers your question, but it's hard for me to say. It's a challenge, though. Yeah, because we're I don't know the metrics, but the number of firms right now that are advertising in San Antonio per capita is higher than probably any other market in the U.S., maybe except for Miami.
Wow.
Yeah, I believe that. I want to dive into specifically trial cases versus settlements, man. we see this a lot, right? We see attorneys steer their clients towards a settlement opposed to going to a trial. And I know you mentioned earlier, right? If you're going to take a client, you're going to take them from A to Z, and if it takes a lawsuit at the end of the day, you're going to file that lawsuit. But what are some of the factors that you take into account, man, looking into that, or just maybe guide us through the process of that?
Sure. So, one of the trends that's been playing out for the last probably 30 years, even before I was a lawyer, is that you've got fewer and fewer cases going to trial. Okay, part of that is by design. Our courts are not our courts, but our system, legislative and judicial, actually has been set up to encourage out-of-court settlements more and more and more. Right, and part of that is a function of also the expense that it takes to get to trial. In some cases, can you spend $1 to get a nickel? The question that has to be asked, I mean, there's so many different fact patterns to determine whether a case, is better for settlement or go to trial. But what it boils down to is simply what is best for the client, right? And the answer to that question isn't always the same when it comes to settling out of court or going to trial. I always tell clients that the best thing they can, in a mediation where a lot of cases tend to settle, because before cases can go to trial, I was talking about some of the changes in our rules. Before cases can go to trial, you're required to go to mediation. You're required to go to mediation. It doesn't mean that the parties want to settle the case, but it means it's required. And a lot of times when you force people to the table, the case can get resolved or sometimes soon thereafter. I always tell clients the best thing they can do, not the best, but the easiest thing they can make it for us is easy to walk away, right? And we have those cases where they make it easy to walk away by not offering within the range of what should be compensation for the case. And you've got to be able to analyze the case from a liability standpoint and then from a damages standpoint, that's definitely a situation where the answer isn't always the same. There are cases and where we get good value without having to go to court, and then the way that we get it in litigation is because they know we will go to court, right? If the other side thinks that you're a lawyer or a law firm that would not try the case, then you'll see that reflected in what's being offered. So. Right.
So speak a little bit more about, so again, we've already established I don't do litigation, but I negotiate for a living. I mean, that's what, transactional attorneys, that's one good thing that we get to do is we're doing deals all the time, right? Being in the market that I'm in now with micro to small business owners, very new to, negotiation versus the other clients I've got. Sophistication, that's what they're used to doing, those business transactions. For you, I would gather a lot of your clients don't understand the negotiation process, in a mediation or even in a settlement situation. What are some tips and tricks you've looked at to help people understand this complex negotiation? Because on my end, I've got clients that are like, well, the contract says, that they're going to do it, and we both know efficient breach theory, right? I mean, as much as we'd love everybody to say a contract is going to be there, they're not. And so you have to walk through, well, you can go to court and this is what it's going to cost you to go try to get it. And you may be paying $1 to get a nickel, even for final jury. How do you walk a client through a very complex economic, legal process to help them understand that the ad they saw, right? Because a lot of this is consumerism of millions of dollars because you get into a car accident is not necessarily their situation today. What are some of the things you do to help people understand their situation?
Sure. So, first, I think in terms of negotiation, you're right. It's not a black and white contractual deal. If it were, it would throw us out of the mix, right? If there was, be like workers' comp.
That's right.
And so, I think being able to explain to them the time and the money involved, right? Like if we do go to trial, this is what you can expect. This is how much we're going to spend. We spend it. Obviously, it's an expense we carry towards any recovery that gets reimbursed. And this, no one can, if you're trying to predict a forecast 6 months from now in San Antonio, good luck.
Correct.
And so with a jury, you don't know who's going to be sitting in that box.
Right.
And ultimately, I think the first thing that's important to consider is that you're going to have 12 people, and you're not going to have any control of who they are. I mean, we do a voir dire, so we get to we get to question them and make sure we get the 12 most impartial people in there. But they're going to have the fate of your case in their hands, and you've got to be sure that that's what you want to do, right? And so understanding the importance and the magnitude of this, but it's in terms of the negotiating and how that works. I mean, it's no different than probably where what you guys do on your end, where you've got the parties that start on opposite ends, and you give and take, You give and take until someone isn't willing to give anymore, right? And at that point, when they're not willing to give anymore, we can usually definitively tell the client, based on where they're at and where you would be, I think it is or isn't in your best interest to go to trial, and and it's all about leverage. I mean, I think there are things that you can do as a lawyer that you should do that for insurance companies, they're about one thing and one thing only: exposure. That's it, right? And you don't create enough exposure by just filing a lawsuit. These companies are worth billions of dollars, right? Filing a lawsuit in and of itself doesn't create the exposure. It's what you do after the lawsuit is filed along the way that creates exposure for them. Did you hire experts? Are you willing to, is your law firm willing to invest in the case? Are you taking depositions? Are you lining all of that up? Are you putting a damages model together, right, on some cases? I think, and do you have a track record of walking away and doing what you say you were going to do and going to court?
Right.
So, but yeah, it's certainly a challenge for clients, and it's always a challenge too, because it's like you said earlier, it's an emotional experience.
Right.
So when you hear about an insurance company talking about your injury in terms of dollars and cents and trying to, nickel and dime you, literally, that creates another level of trauma and emotion that, we have to deal with.
Yeah.
But you explain to them, look, at the end of the day, you just got to do what's best for you, and that's what we're there for. And seeing through that, right? Taking the emotion out of that decision and making the decision that's best for you or your family is what you want to do.
Interesting, man. I want to take us to our last narrative, kind of guiding us through the importance of justice, kind of the effects that it has on society, right? When people are watching the news, for instance, and they see that, somebody gets off. I think that has an effect, right? Protests happen, things happen in the world, and ultimately there are repercussions to injustice or justice being served. What's your kind of philosophy on that, man? How do you go through that?
As it ties into what I do for a living, there's accountability is key. You have to have accountability in any society, right? And we're very fortunate in that we live in a country where there are laws that allow someone making minimum wage to take on a corporate entity worth billions of dollars, right? If they've been wronged. You've still got to prove it, but you can do that. The ability to do that is great. Now, what my point of view, when we start to take away the ability of people to do that, then we're going in the wrong direction. Seventh Amendment to our Constitution, the right to a trial by jury, is important. There's people we fought and died for that, And unfortunately, what we've seen, I think I read there was a editorial Chamber of Commerce stuff, local, that was talking about this trucking bill and why we needed it, and that commercial vehicle bill. And there were some things said in there that I really, really, really took offense to, because I think it's just a gross mischaracterization of what's really going on, in our society. Everybody wants to cut back their rights until it affects them, right? And I cannot tell you how many clients who have sat across from me, across the desk, and told me, I used to think this was just a bunch of people, waiting for a lottery ticket. I understand now. And until it touches you, until it affects you, and I hope it never happens to anyone listening out there, obviously, right? I mean, this is one of the things usually how I meet people is in a time of loss. But you prevent that from happening, right? You reduce the chances of that happening. You're never going to stop motor vehicle crashes with 18-wheelers or commercial trucks or anything else, right? You're never going to prevent that. But you reduce that by having in place a system of accountability for the drivers and the companies of these people who are hurting people, right? If they know they have to be accountable to something, right, they're going to have systems and processes in place to prevent that from happening, right? And it's not always going to work. But, what you don't want to do is create a system that insulates and protects wrongdoers. Because if there's no exposure there, unfortunately you're going to see you see a lot of this stuff with when was that? When I was a kid, I think it was the documentary. Maybe it was when I was a kid. I was in high school. The McDonald's hot coffee documentary. Remember that?
Yeah.
When I would do VORDA, I don't do it as much because it's been some time. But the McDonald's case, when you ask juries what they think about when you have a personal injury case and they're sitting there, and guaranteed McDonald's hot coffee, right? No one really knows anything about the case. All they know is a lady got $1 million for spilling coffee on her lap. And they think that's it, right? They don't look underneath the hood. And if you did, you would realize she suffered third-degree burns,
right,
and had to have skin grafts.
Right.
And then McDonald's knew that this was going to happen at some point.
Right.
But they made a decision to value profits over people, right? And I'm not aiming this at just McDonald's, but my point is that there are stereotypes out there, and unfortunately, plaintiffs are stereotyped a lot. I think it's dangerous. We're kind of in a dangerous place if you ask people what they think what problems that exist out in society. Inevitably, you're going to have some people say, jury verdicts, run away. And some of it's that marketing you talked about earlier, right? How does that hurt us?
Right.
To me, it's not like a business thing that hurts me. It's the perception that hurts me. Because I can tell you, if you saw some of the stuff I've seen over the last couple of years, some of the crashes I've seen over the road, you've seen some of the mangled cars, bodies, and I'm not just trying to be dramatic, but it's there. There's people who've lost people and who are losing people and who are going to lose people. If we don't have a system of accountability in place, it's tough for me as a driver to be out there when I'm driving from point A to point B with my family.
Right. Can you draw a little attention? Can you expand on what bill it is you're talking about that way?
There was it's actually going to be a law in September that created. It was a big point of contention in the legislature on.
So it got passed.
It got passed. Now it's not as bad as it was originally written. But it limits, what we can do as far as discovery. When I say discovery, I mean inquiry into a company and their hiring policies and some of other issues that they've. Because here's the thing. A lot of times when on the trucking cases and the commercial motor vehicle cases, right, you're looking at a crash occurs, who is negligent, who's at fault. That's it. That's all you need to know. It's actually a lot more than that, right? There's a pattern that goes into it.
Right.
A lot of these crashes that happen don't just happen in the blink of an eye. They started 3 or 4 years before with a pattern of poor training, poor supervision, those things can be prevented. Right. And so it just makes it harder for us to get into that. I won't get too deep into the weeds, but there's things at the trial level where they have to have a bifurcated trial with punitive damages. It does some other things as well.
Are they still limiting discovery in that sense?
For punities, no. Not for punitive damages. But the reality is most cases, when we try the cases, punitive damages are tough because they can get taken away pretty easily. But that's the thing. And like I said, it's not as bad as it could have been. But I think, we're going in the wrong direction for that. At the end of the day, people, if it is a jury verdict, people that are deciding that are our citizens, right? These aren't personal injury lawyers. These aren't insurance adjusters or insurance defense lawyers. Ultimately, it is people sitting in the jury box who make that final determination. And if what you're telling me is we should limit the information that they have when they make a decision, that says something.
Right. Yeah, it's closely relative to a lot of things I've discovered.
Well, and part of the problem we get into, and this is in government, they always over legislate, always. Mm-hmm. I mean, every single, right. I mean, they take the top example, right, of the most egregious action, and they legislate towards the egregious action as opposed to legislating towards the, 80% of what goes on. They legislate to that 20%. And what it does is it harms 80%. And they do it both ways, right? I mean, I represent companies. So we find ourselves, sometimes dealing with laws that limit us that go too far for even guys that are trying to do, or females that are trying to do the right thing. And again, what's interesting in the state of Texas, I guess, is where's that curve going to go, right? Does it continue to slowly go this way, or will it start to bend back towards the 80%? I don't know. In a variety of matters, not just this one, but in a variety of legislation we see out there.
I agree. And I don't mean to sound, when I talk about companies or insurance companies that all of them are bad, because that's not true.
Right.
I just happen to deal with the ones that aren't good. And so but you got to have a system in place to incentivize that, right? And when you take away the exposure, then you're right. The cases that get attention, because I don't care what you do, right? Whether you're a lawyer, you're a doctor, you're in marketing, you're in advertising, creative agents, whatever you do, you're going to have bad apples in the bunch.
Yep.
It's life, right? And when the focus starts being those bad apples, then you're going to create a system of just bad laws, because you're assuming everyone else is like that. They're not, you know? So the same thing with cases, do they have some cases they can use and throw up there for shock value? Sure.
Yeah.
But what about the other 80%? What about the 90% that are the real, what's really happening out there?
Right. Well, and I'm sure you've got cases too. I mean, insurance is necessary, right? It's how we can allocate risk. And so I'm sure you've got some cases, right, on the other end of the spectrum where somebody's gotten hurt. You come to the table, everybody says, yep, we're going to take care of this thing. And people get restitution and move on with their lives, right? Businesses move on. The insurance company goes to the next one on the list, and your client goes on, right? But you don't talk about those either, right?
Right.
You talk about the ones that are the $1 million, or those, again, that upper 20%. So it's a challenge, right? It's a perception challenge even for the business community, that the business community and plaintiffs' attorneys are enemies.
Right.
Some of them might be, but they're insurance defense attorneys, right? But the business community and the personal injury bar are not at war by any means.
No, not at all.
They're a necessary, that 80% is necessary to keep us all on the right path.
Exactly. No, and there are cases where, our bigger results have truly been for traumatic loss.
Right.
And you've got to have the ability to do that.
Right.
And on the flip side, there's that 20%, maybe 10% that we talk about as the extreme examples, but they're on both ends of the spectrum, right? Yeah. I've seen, we get calls from folks who were misled about what they thought they were going to do, the insurance company,
right?
And they signed a release,
right?
How fair is that?
Right. Yeah, no, I get
it. You don't. But again, they don't hear those stories. So you're right. I mean, the hopefully that bend occurs towards the 80% and not towards the polar
extremes.
Yeah. I'm a big proponent of that, and in lots of different things. Is that we need to look more at what the reality is of in life and what's going on than focus on the extremes.
Yeah.
Interesting point. I like to finalize the podcast always, George, is we understand we have a younger audience that's always listening. In terms of, where you've been and where you're headed, what type of advice would you give to that younger person who's whether, making a decision to go into law or just start their own business? What things have you learned that you could kind of give perspective in?
Sure. And I can speak to both. I mean, because, first, I think as a lawyer, right, early on, I recognized that I wanted to be a lawyer, and everyone has their own reasons for that calling. I think, first of all, ask yourself, is it truly what you feel as a calling? And if it is, do it. I didn't grow up around lawyers. I was the first in my family to go to college. And I think, you've just got to have, if you're ambitious and you have that drive, there's no reason you can't do it. There's The field of law is changing every day. What it looks like now is not what it's going to look like in 20 years. But the common denominator between now and then is going to be you need people with law licenses that are genuinely good human beings. And, to me, that is what's most important. And I can say that about people that I have on cases. Like you said earlier, they're not my enemies, right? I often say we work together. But if you have, good human beings who are just, want to do good work, then do it. It's a journey. It's a process. One of the things that, I think made it difficult for me, not difficult is the right word, but sort of more foreign to me than maybe some of my other colleagues who had, those resources and you lawyers or parents were lawyers, was not understanding what was going to be needed for me, the importance of the financial aspect of it as well. I graduated law school with a ton of student debt that was like paralyzing student debt, and there's things you can do to start preparing for that now if law school is in your plan. Fortunately, I got into a position where, I could wipe that out, but, there's still people that I know that haven't, and so I think, if you want to be a lawyer, you want to get into law, put yourself in those situations to see what we really do, right? Internships, clerkships, see what the nitty gritty really is. Because what you see on TV isn't what it's not that, there are parts of it that can be that, but dealing with people, humans. I mean, for me, what prepared me for what I do now wasn't really the 3 years I spent at UT. It was part of it, but it was working at Blockbuster at the front desk, dealing with customers, right? Or working at a music store, selling phones. I sold phones in college. I did that for 4 years, and sunglasses, watches, and then phones. But learning how to talk to people is the skill that serves me best. And so if you want to go into law school, even though you can't, maybe you're not, maybe you're in high school, maybe you're in junior high, maybe you're in college right now, what you can do is just start doing more of that, Yeah. And so, starting your own business, that's a great question, because just because you want to be a lawyer doesn't mean necessarily you want to start your own business. And for me, it took a lot more for me to do that than to be a lawyer, to be honest with you. Like, more courage for me to do that than to be a lawyer. I think it's something I always knew I wanted to do. But 10 years in, I will say it's the best decision I ever made. It is my passion, my pride. It's a journey in growth, right? I would say though that patience is key. It is truly about the journey and not the destination, right? I'm not there. I don't ever think of myself of being there. I'm still trying to get there. And for me, what keeps me going is knowing like I'm still trying to do it. I'm still trying to do it. I never want to feel like I did it. And that's not just with running my business or with a lawyer. Complacency is an enemy. So I never want to feel complacent. But I think understanding, for me, the hardest part was that failure is a possibility. That's okay. You don't, I think, I heard someone describe it this way, is it's like a game, the other team's going to put up some points. You're not trying to keep them scoreless, right? You're just trying to win. And the same thing for a business. It's not going to be perfect. There are days when I get home, there are weeks where it's like, man, I miss just being a lawyer.
Right.
I
understand.
But you ask me, is it worth it? Absolutely. I think one of the greatest, the thing that I'm most proud of as a business owner, and I think maybe people out there listening who have started businesses maybe can relate to, isn't like one single result, one single case. I'm very much proud of some of that, but it's the concept of having built a team that's in place that I can trust, right? That are like extensions of me out there when, because I think that was one of the things, like letting go of control was hard for me, right? I wanted to be involved in everything. I couldn't, and then so finally learning to do that. But I think the concept of being okay with failure, realizing that's okay, and having the courage to just do it and not be afraid of that. I mean, I certainly think that, I think it's the old Japanese proverb that goes, fall down 8 times, get up 9, that applies. So, at the end of the day, the ambition, the hunger, the drive, if you've got those things, you're going to make it, right? If you understand that it's a journey, it's a process, and you enjoy the process, you're going to make it.
Right.
That's great stuff.
Yeah, I think that's huge, man. I think looking back, you got to think of failures as more of lessons, right? The more failures you could kind of stack up, in my opinion, I feel like there's wisdom that comes out of that. There's stamina that comes out of that most than anything. And it ultimately, I mean, yeah, those are inevitable. Can't be afraid of those, man.
Yeah, I have a sign on top of my desk at the office that says success is never owned. It is only rented, and the rent is due every day.
Yep.
That's that concept, right? I never want to be in a place where I'm thinking about, don't get me wrong, I'm trying to get better about being able to enjoy some of the thing, and I'm grateful. I think there's a difference between being grateful for what you've done and what you have than living off of it, living in it, right? And where it's stopping you from growing and doing bigger and better things. I know people where I think that applies. But yeah, the failures are part of it. And, I never truly understood how people could say, like, appreciate your failures, but I do now.
Right.
Because we wouldn't be doing what we're doing if we hadn't had, and that applies to business, that applies to life, and that applies to just, being a person, right? The failures define you, or you can use them to make you a better person and a better business owner, better lawyer, better husband, better father.
Right. Well, I certainly appreciate that wisdom and you sharing that, George. Any last remarks, Matt, before we sign off?
It's good to meet you.
Likewise. I know I've heard about you and you've heard about me, but it's
good to
put
we've
a
never
face
actually
in the name.
met. Yeah.
All righty, guys. Well, if you're watching, we want to thank George again for coming on the podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. If you're likewise, if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, or not YouTube, apologize, Spotify or iTunes, make sure you hit subscribe on there. And other than that, George, thanks again for coming on, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.
Cool. Thanks
a
for
lot.
having me.